everyone, and welcome back to another video. Today I felt that we were long overdue for another lore video, and I decided to do one that is going to be more into the history of the Shards of Final Fantasy XIV. Now, for those of you who've been sleeping through class, the Shards are fragments of the original world of 14, the world of the Ascians. It had been stated around the beginning, around 12,000 years ago, the world was once whole, and they were the supreme race. The Ascians were a peaceful and highly advanced civilization who lived in many different utopian cities where the people were devoted to the ideas of debate, creation, art and science, and public service. It had been suggested that there were actually many different cities across this star, but the people of Amarot seemed to be at the very center and were the most powerful users of creation magic. At some point, however, during this history, something changed. It was said that a mysterious sound came from within the star itself, and the fear it created caused the people to lose control of their creation magic and accidentally unleash monsters from this. I will be doing another video on what I think was the cause of this strange sound, as well as a better understanding of it later on, but to make a long story short for right now, the Convocation of Amarot were the strongest and the most powerful of all the Ascians, and they seem to be making up most of the modern-day Ascians that we're stuck dealing with today. They were the ones who resorted to summoning Zodiark through sacrificing half of their own people. They did this so that they could save their dying world, which in the end did end up doing that. Later on, though, they were forced to sacrifice another half of the surviving members of their people to heal the star and ended up bringing new life to this world. But it turned out that these new life forms weren't like the Ascians. They didn't have their longevity or the ability to use creation magic. In fact, they were considered to be so weak and limited, many of the Ascians considered these new life forms to be inferior and unworthy of attention. And it probably didn't help matters that the Convocation were now tempered by Zodiark and therefore lived to serve him, and so he probably would have demanded new life sacrifices. So it was probably because of a combination of all of this that they decided to harvest these new lives to Zodiark to restore the Ascians who were first sacrificed. Now, not everyone agreed with this plan. There was a faction of the Amarotians who disapproved of this greatly, and they stood against the Convocation's plans. This is what led to them eventually summoning Hydaelyn to bind Zodiark and hold him in check. Now, it was never said if this was an accident. I mean, Elidibus did give hints that this may have actually been planned out, but all that we know for sure is that once Hydaelyn and Zodiark battled each other, the world was divided into 13 reflections, and the Source World, or what was left of it, because of Hydaelyn's powers. Amarot was destroyed, the history of the star was forgotten, and the people who survived up to that point were basically shattered into just tiny shades of the former people they used to be. There were only 3 Ascians who managed to escape the Sundering. We had Elidibus, Lahabrea, and Emexelg, and they were the ones who resolved to orchestrate a series of events to revive Zodiark and restore their home through the rejoinings, or the cataclysms designed to gradually merge the source and its shards back into one. They had planned to carry out the original plan from the very beginning. Once all the shards were rejoined with the source, they would continue to sacrifice humanity to bring back their loved ones once the rejoining was complete and watch over the worlds, which is pretty messed up, right? Yet in spite of all of that, a part of me understands where they're coming from. I mean, I can totally understand why, despite the fact that they were tempered and forced to make a terrible decision to try and save their home and everyone on it, they were still forced to watch it fall apart. They watched it get ruined and watched as everything that they knew and loved died. Not to mention, they were forced to continue watching for thousands of years, mostly alone, grieving, angry, unable to fix any of this. They are just constantly reminded of their past failures just by looking at these shards and what was left of the home they once knew. They are also the ones responsible for so much chaos and destruction. I mean, they have succeeded in almost destroying the Source World multiple times and did manage to destroy several of the shards. Now, we know that they created the several calamities, or rather, they set up a series of events which led to these calamities taking place. So, what exactly are the calamities? What are the astral eras and the umbral eras? So as of right now in the storyline of the game, we just survived 7 calamities. and narrowly avoided an 8th. I mean, there's still a possibility another one could be right around the corner, but as of right now, we managed to avoid at least the bad future with the 8th Umbral Calamity and the Black Rose. And with every calamity that comes, we know that an entire star is being wiped out and all the life on it is being rejoined with the source world. So here we are. We have the source world, which is surrounded by these 13 shards. And with 7 calamities, we have 6 stars remaining, though that may be closer to 5 since one of the worlds has become the void. So which shards are remaining and which ones have already been wiped out? Why is it important to know this? Well, there is a chance, however faint, that we may end up traveling to these other shards one day too. I personally find that idea very unlikely, but hey, you never know, there's always a chance. And just the idea I find really fascinating, and I would just love to see more about these other worlds. Now, according to both the Exarch and MXL, we have only a handful of shards left, including the source world. So apart from the first, we also have the 4th, the 8th, the 9th, and the 11th shard still surviving. The exception to this being the 13th, which was destroyed by a flood of darkness and turned into a useless void by the Ascians. So here is the order. The Ascians were impatient in bringing about a calamity to the shards and ended up accidentally causing a flood of darkness upon the 13th shard, which turned it into a void that we now know today. As far as we know so far, this world is beyond saving and there is really nothing else that we can do about it. However, I do think that it's possible the Ascians may have come up with another way to restore the 13th to at least a usable shard, since their plans did involve all the world eventually returning to the source. But I think it's safe to say that this world is out of the picture for right now. So the way that they explained it, each of the Ascians prime one of the shards to be destroyed, and then they cause like this huge disaster upon the source world, which allows all this ether from one of the shards to return to the source world. So kind of like how they described it was like a flood. For example, according to Eorzean history, the first Umbral Calamity happened almost 12,000 years ago, where a great wind tore a great continent from the sky. Now it turns out that this was due to the destruction of the 5th shard. Like how the first was being overcome with a flood of light, it seems that the 5th suffered from a kind of flood of wind, or like a great whirlwind of wind. So when the rejoining happened, all of that wind-aspected ether left the shard and returned to the source, which caused this huge wind disaster, which led to the first Umbral Calamity, the Calamity of Wind. And it's just like with all the other shards that were destroyed, each one of them was kind of overcome with a certain flood of a certain element. And so when the rejoining eventually happened, all of that power, like all of that elemental power, had to go somewhere, and so it affected the source world. So for example, the next calamity that took place upon the source were several thousand years after the first calamity, where the people of the source took nature for granted and began to pollute it. They were cutting down trees, they were working forges until the sky turned black, and that's when the next calamity, the Calamity of Lightning, came down, and great bolts of lightning fell from the sky and burned up land and lakes and just dried up everything. You couldn't even go outside without risk being struck by lightning. This devastated the land, and the people had no choice but to actually retreat into shelters underground until the lightning died down, which apparently continued on for an entire year and a day. Now, all of this happened due to the destruction of the 12th shard, which brought about the second Umbral era. Now, the third calamity after that was the Calamity of Fire, which brought a massive drought and wildfires to the lands during the Holy Wars of Eorzea. Naturally, the fighting quickly died out during this time as the people were struggling just to survive, and all the water was being dried up and their food stores were being burned up. And all of this fire happened because of the destruction of the second shard, which brought about the third Umbral era. I'm sure you can see where this is going now. So the next calamity happened during the fall of the Allagan Empire, where a massive power flooded through the Crystal Tower from Dalamud, which ended up triggering a massive earthquake that changed entire continents and even buried the entire tower and brought an end to the Allagan Empire. This was also due in part to the destruction of the third shard and the arrival of the Calamity of Earth. The next calamity after that was a massive ice age, which caused all of Eorzea to freeze under a giant blanket of ice and snow. Almost everything was frozen over because that was when the sixth shard was destroyed and brought with it the fifth umbral calamity, the Calamity of Ice. The second to last calamity that we know of happened around 1500 years before the current storyline during the War of the Magi. Now, the opposing forces of the cities of Amdapor, Mach, and Nymph were all at war with each other. The two forces between Amdapor and Mach caused so much damage that it caused the elementals to cause a flood of gigantic proportions that led to the drowning of entire nations. This was known as the Calamity of Water, and it was brought on from when the 10th shard was rejoined with the source as well. And finally, we have the most recent calamity, which happened 5 years before the current storyline. This was the destruction of when Dalamun was brought down and Bahamut escaped to rain destruction down upon the land. And this was not only the 7th calamity, but it was also the destruction of the 7th shard, and to this day it still left scars all across the land. So as of right now, we're running out of shards. There's only a couple of them left, as well as the alternate timeline where the first was rejoined to the source and brought with it the 8th umbral calamity, which may have been named something like the Calamity of Umbral or even Lights, though I don't think we need to worry about that for right now. For right now, we did manage to tip the scales back far enough to prevent that. Make no mistake, the first is still a mess. We only have about 10% of it remaining for now, and so it's going to take generations for it to recover to what it was. Right now, we are currently working with Reen in order to help bring life back to what they call the empty, the 90% left of what the shattered world once was. So there's always a chance that while it will take a very, very long time, it will eventually recover on its own, especially once we're finished dealing with Eden. So where does that leave us right now? Right now, there are still the shards of the 4th, the 8th, the 9th, and the 11th remaining. And plus the 13th, if we really do want to count it. I'm not sure if we really should because there's really not much left to it except like this giant empty void. But I'm all on board if Square Enix wanted to find a way to save that world or do something with it. I mean, I think it'd be pretty cool to look more into that if that's possible. Anyway, that's all for right now. This is all that we know for sure about these remaining shards and possibly maybe opening up the way to new adventures to going to each of these shards. Again, I'm a little dubious about it. If they do decide to take that route and allow us to go to other shards one day, I really want to see them do that journey well. I really want to see them tie a really good story into doing that someday. But that's way off in the future. I mean, we got our own share of problems with just the first and the source to deal with. So anyway, that's all for right now. That is a quick history of the destroyed shards, the calamities, and all that's remaining left. I really do miss doing these lore videos. I really need to start doing them more often. So if any of you have a suggestion out there about the new lore video coming up in the future, like you want to hear more about it, please let me know down in the comments below. And I'll be seeing you all again soon. So until then, everyone, bye-bye.